Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a video about an insider's perspective on Diablo game development. You see, former Diablo 3 game director Jay Wilson was recently on the Diablo podcast, hosted by Zaeith and with Diablo community member Nineball, and Wilson shed some light on Diablo 3's development, including confirming past leaks, dropping some bombs that will upset some fans, and shedding light on Blizzard's game development cycle and what it can mean for Diablo 4. In this video, I'll cover some of my highlights from the podcast and give my thoughts, and if you'd like to watch the full podcast, I'll have a link in the description. As always, discussion timestamps can be found in the description, but right before you skip ahead, just a quick reminder to ring that sub notification bell to be alerted to new videos. But before I move on, a quick word from this video's sponsor, True Classic, a provider of premium wardrobe essentials at accessible prices. Now, we all know, or if you don't, here's a pro tip. Clothes that fit you well, that are tailored for your body, is one of the most important things when it comes to style. We've all seen some rich dude in some designer suit that just doesn't fit him well and it looks like a clown suit. True Classic premium tees are designed for guys' bodies. They accentuate the arms and the shoulders. I'm a slim guy. Throughout my whole life, I've always had a hard time finding clothes that fit me well, that don't look big and baggy on me, but also don't squeeze my chest. When I get t-shirts, the sleeves are often these big floppy things, hang down, make my arms look even punier, but I mean, look at this fit. Perfect. Reasonably priced clothes that fit you well will make you look better than expensive clothes that don't. And that's what True Classic's about. I got two types of tees from True Classic. One type is a cotton and polyester blend that is just so super soft. I'm not the kind of person to normally notice these things, but as soon as I grabbed the tee out of the package, I was just surprised by how soft it felt. And the other is a performance tee for physical activity. It's mostly polyester, and it's so lightweight and soft that it feels like I'm wearing nothing at all. These are some of the comfiest tees I've ever owned, and I recommend True Classic. So, shop True Classic with my link below, trueclassictees.com/Rhykker. Now, Jay Wilson was Diablo 3's game director. He was hired by Blizzard to take over Diablo 3 after Blizzard shut down Blizzard North. He was first hired as lead designer, but then he got moved up to game director, which he described as being a co-lead position with a production director. He described the synergy as follows.
So the production director was kind of I think he said I was the what, he was the how. And the two of us kind of co-led the team.
Now, Wilson stayed with Blizzard for 8 years. He saw Diablo 3 ship, and he stayed on for half of the development of Reaper of Souls before moving on to different projects within Blizzard in 2013, and ultimately leaving the company altogether in 2016. Now, during his time working on Diablo 3, Jay Wilson met a game designer named Joe Shelley. Shelley had been at Blizzard since at least 2007, working on the World of Warcraft team, and then he moved on to the Diablo 3 team sometime after Diablo 3 launched to work on Reaper of Souls. Now, while Shelley wasn't under Jay Wilson for very long, since Wilson left the team, Shelley still left a very strong impression on Wilson. Now, Shelley's been on the Diablo team for about a decade. He was originally the lead game designer for Diablo 4, and after Diablo 4 game director Barriga left Blizzard in 2021, Shelley was promoted up to that position. And here's what Wilson had to say about Shelley.
Well, first thing I'll say is the current design director of Diablo 4 is Joe Shelley, and he is a fantastic designer. They're lucky to have him. I think he's great. I've always thought he was great.
Now, Wilson says he has no inside information on Diablo 4's development. Again, he hasn't worked for Blizzard in 6 years, but he did shed some light on past processes that we could use to guess some things about Diablo 4 and its production schedule. According to Jay Wilson, a release date for a Blizzard game is locked in a year and a half before release.
Typically, about 18 months out, you make a decision about your ship date at Blizzard, and come hell or high water, it's probably not going to move. So you do the best you can, in that 18 months.
Now, given Diablo 4 will release within the first half of 2023, that means this date was locked in sometime between mid-2021 and early 2022. And it was in November of 2021 that Activision Blizzard told shareholders that Overwatch 2 and Diablo 4 would not be releasing in 2022. It would not surprise me if it was around this time that the release date for D4 was locked in, which, if the rumor is true, will be in April 2023. And I'm going to guess specifically April 11th, since that's a Tuesday, and Blizzard likes to release games on Tuesdays, and because April 11th is 154 days after November 8th, which is when Tales from the Heraldric Library, the Diablo book, released. Now you might wonder, well, why does it matter when that Diablo book released? Well, because the Book of Cain released 154 days before Diablo 3, and the Book of Tyrael released 154 days before Reaper of Souls. But if the other rumor is true, we'll be getting a firm release date on December 8th, so check back next week, and hopefully we'll know for sure. But I digress. Wilson also shared some insight on how Diablo 3's Crusader class, which was introduced in the Reaper of Souls expansion, had already been settled on 5 years before Diablo 3 even shipped. Before they even announced Diablo 3, they knew they were making a Crusader.
But a lot of that, like with the first expansion, like, we knew we were going to do the Crusader years before. Like, years. I would say 5 years before we shipped D3, maybe.
So that was even before you announced the game. We
were already working on it really early on, because we knew we were going to do a paladin type character, and we knew we didn't want to just redo the paladin. Like we felt like we could go felt like the Crusader would feel a little more Diablo, like, because it's a little bit of a darker character, and we knew we wanted a more melee character in armor because we didn't have that character. So it was, once we kind of assigned, and we debated between Monk and Crusader, because Monk was kind of the last one I don't think Monk was the last we announced. But Demon Hunter was the last we announced.
Yeah.
But Monk was actually the last one we decided. And it was because we were debating between the Monk and the Crusader. So the Crusader was like a known quantity, because we knew whichever one didn't make it was going to be
next.
So it seems that things are decided upon way ahead of time. Probably longer than most people would have guessed. Now, what does this mean? Well, the next class for Diablo 4, which we could expect will launch in an expansion maybe sometime in 2025, that class is already determined. Probably has been for a while. And honestly, it would not surprise me if it's a paladin or something like a paladin, that holy class, for the same reasons that Wilson outlined. Now, another topic that was raised was beta feedback. We know that a closed endgame beta started a few weeks ago for Diablo 4, and as per the alleged leaks, it's already over. And that begs the question, with Diablo 4 releasing by mid-2023 at the latest, how much can the devs really change based on beta feedback? And Jay had the following insight here to share.
I think if you're, I don't know what their ship date is, so I can't say like relative to what their ship date is. I would say if you're 3 months out, probably not much. Like you can change tuning variables. So like drop rates you can change, like those kinds of things. Like if a monster's too hard or too easy, you can change that. You can change distribution. If you need programming, if you need code for something, 3 months out, probably not. 6 months out, yeah.
So basically, if Diablo 4 is shipping in April, then that's probably not enough time to make significant changes to the game. Just mostly balance changes. If, however, the release will be in June, then possibly bigger changes can still be implemented. This is also important to bear in mind for the open beta in early 2023. This basically precludes that beta being able to effectuate any kind of major change other than balance changes. Now, Jay Wilson obviously spoke a lot about Diablo 3 and its development, and through the conversation, he inadvertently touched upon a couple of old leaks. First off, Nightball brought up the leaked King in the North expansion, which was the code name for the alleged second expansion for Diablo 3 that was scrapped. And here's what Wilson had to say.
So, King of the North was not while I was there. There was not really hardly any discussion about it. Now, some of the features they might have been planning might have been features that we had talked about or wanted to do, but that was completely under Josh's reign. Once we kind of got into the first expansion, everything that I think we really wanted to do with that expansion, like we had focused on. I didn't assume we were going to get more than one, so I didn't really think beyond one.
Now, the fact that he acknowledged the existence of King of the North rather than ask, what are you talking about, is a pretty convincing case for this leak to be true. That said, he gives a seemingly contradictory statement by suggesting that he thought Diablo 3 would have only one expansion. Now, this statement goes against the leaked product slate from 2010 that showed 2 planned expansions for Diablo 3. But I suppose we can chalk this up to the condition was always that a second expansion will only be made if the game was successful enough. And as per the King of the North leak, this second expansion was scrapped in either late 2013 or early 2014, just a few months before the release of Reaper of Souls. Instead, the team was moved on to making Diablo 4, or at least the first iteration of Diablo 4, Project Hades, which was allegedly a Dark Souls-style Diablo game canceled in 2016, at which point the Diablo 4 that we're getting now began production. Now, one thing I found really interesting, and actually painfully shocking, was that the idea to add rifts to Diablo 3, which were added after Reaper of Souls launched, which is more than 2 years after D3 launched, rifts were already planned long before Diablo 3 released. In fact, the idea was, in some form, already established by Blizzard North a decade before Diablo 3 released.
We knew rifts were going to be a big part of the game, although I think we got those out before in like adventure mode. But those were all like things we planned well before ship. Rifts was actually a Blizzard North idea that when I came in, there was a design document written for it. Now, what we ended up doing was different in a lot of ways, but the core idea was there from the very beginning. Like that was always something we were going to do. And it's just one of those things where we looked at it and went, we don't need to ship with this. Like, this is a great idea, but it's not a shipping idea. In the same way, like people asked a lot about, like, before we shipped, are there going to be seasons? And I was kind of cagey about it because I have a hard time, like, every other game I ever worked on, once you shipped it, you were done forever. Like, you were lucky if you got patches. So in some ways, my mindset was still there. Like, well, it was Diablo. I knew we'd get patches and everything. So I wasn't worried about that, but I didn't know how much content we'd be able to add.
Rifts were such a groundbreaking feature, such an evolution in the genre, in Diablo, that while sure they were not necessary to include in the game at launch, they would have really helped make Diablo 3 be seen as an evolution of the ARPG rather than a dumbing down, which is what many Diablo 2 players felt it was. But Wilson's design philosophy was to focus on doing fewer things and executing them perfectly rather than floundering at doing a bunch of different things.
Like, be really good at a few things. Those other ideas will have their day if your game is good. Like, so make your game good. Don't put too much into it because you've got to really focus on everything takes longer than you think it's going to take. Make those things great, and then the other things will come. And I've never met a development team that didn't end a product with, like, another product and a half worth of ideas on how to continue with that product.
This is also the reason that Diablo 3 released with weak itemization, something that Jay Wilson actually fully agrees with.
If people come to me and say, I don't like the itemization when Diablo 3 shipped, yeah, me either. Well, I didn't like it either. It wasn't there, like, and I recognize that.
Now, Diablo 3's legendary items became greatly improved sometime after launch. I'm not going to say that D3's itemization is amazing, but things got better. And apparently they had planned for the system of more interesting legendary items from before launch. Wilson admits that it was a mistake to not have the system ready for launch.
The other mistake was there was a specific feature we needed for legendaries that would allow us to basically put abilities on the legendaries, which allowed us to do things like occasionally a treasure golem will spawn. And a lot of the crazy legendaries that we made after shipping, we utilized that feature, but we could not put that feature into the game before we shipped. We just didn't we should have, honestly, I should have predicted that we needed it like year 1, year 2. and asked for it as part of the itemization, but we missed it. And then when we realized we needed it, it was too late. That train was moving.
Now, Wilson said this in the context of admitting two major mistakes with Diablo 3, with the first being having a very limited beta that only included a look at the very early game. You can basically just go to the Skeleton King, if I remember correctly. It was max level 15, I'm pretty sure.
So a bunch of people on the internet are going to be mad at me for this answer. But I believe in truthfulness, and I think I've said this before. We knew probably a month or two before the game came out. So we made a couple mistakes. Mistake number one was we were worried about revealing our story. And so we did not do a full beta test. That was a mistake. Screw the story. Like, we should have done a full beta test. Like, I mean, I'm attached to the story and everything, but the truth is that the late game and the itemization and the balance tuning, all those things, like, that is the point of a beta test, and we failed that point. That was, I'm going to put that on me. I'm not the only one who made the decision, but I could have changed that direction. And I was, I bought into this, like, well, we want to keep all our spoilers to ourselves. And I'm like, I think that was a mistake.
So the beta is the first thing, and it's worth noting that Diablo 4 does not seem to be making the same mistake. The end game beta gave players access to the whole game apart from the story. So they found a way to preserve the story, but still beta test the entire full minimum to max level experience. Now, while Jay said the beta is the first mistake, he said that the second mistake was the legendary thing that we just spoke about before, and it's a little unclear, but I think he meant that the legendaries is a thing that people would be upset about, and that it was just a month or two before release that they realized they had to push the feature because there wasn't enough time to make code changes. If that's the case, that's understandable, because yes, we were that close to getting better legendaries at launch rather than completely useless legendaries at launch. Wilson figured that the game could be released in an imperfect state and then made perfect post-release. He then made the funniest joke ever.
But the thought has always been, well, if the game's not perfect when we release it, the audience will understand.
Ah yes, the internet is largely known for being completely rational and understanding.
I thought maybe we'd get a little bit more leeway because of that, but I didn't feel like we got any leeway. I felt like it was like, well, you didn't get the legendaries quite right, so you've destroyed my childhood and you've ruined Diablo.
Wilson and his team apparently knew about a lot of the problems that D3 had before the game even launched. They weren't surprised by a lot of the criticism, but they had a deadline, and they couldn't risk making big changes.
And I would say a lot of it we probably knew before we shipped. But they were things that we could not change before we shipped. And then we tried to change as quickly as could after we shipped. Because again, like, you get into this window of, like, your game becomes locked, where there's very little you can change about it. And some high risk changes just don't go in, because you just can't.
Now, on that topic, Wilson did say one thing that I unfortunately feel I have to side with the internet outrage here, and that was about drop rates.
Well, and what's funny is, so, like, and I tell you, I'm going to say this now, and somebody is going to slip into a DM somewhere and tell me I'm wrong, but the drop rate for legendaries in D3 at ship was much higher than D2. And people will say, no, it wasn't. No, you guys never dropped legendaries. D2 was way more generous. I'm like, I have played thousands of hours of D2 with a stopwatch and a notepad, like, writing down. I know exactly what the drop rate for legendaries was. Like, so when I say it, I don't say it uneducated. Like, I'm like, no, I know what the drop rate was. I know what ours was relative to it. And it was more generous, and then we doubled it, like, almost immediately. Like, so, but I still have people to this day who would tell me that D3 was, like, at ship was horrible for dropping legendaries. And the truth was, Like, people weren't happy with the rate that the legendaries dropped. They're right. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm only disagreeing with their memory of D2.
All right, now we fight. So, this was my experience playing Diablo 3. It was literally 40 hours, not 14, that's 40 hours, before I got my first legendary or set drop in Diablo 3. 40. And I've polled other people, and other people have had similar experiences. Not everyone, but enough that I don't seem like a crazy outlier. Now, if Jay Wilson is saying that the drop rates for Diablo 2 at Diablo 2's launch were worse than this, I can't argue with that. I don't know or remember what they were at launch. But if he's saying that the drop rates for Diablo 2, as Diablo 2 existed in 2012 after its major patches past Lord of Destruction, which is what they should have been basing the drop rates on, not the drop rates before they corrected the drop rates, then I'm sorry, I just can't. I have never gone 40 hours of gameplay in Diablo 2 without getting a drop. I like the Diablo 2 drop rates. I generally get my first unique or set item within the first couple of acts of the game. I've never not gotten a unique or set to drop by the time I've killed Diablo, for instance. So if Diablo 3 was not coded to have lower drop rates, which I'm willing to concede, I don't know how it was coded, he knows how it was coded, then some bug, something happened, something was happening, something broke, something wasn't working properly to make myself and a number of other people have these immense outlier experiences. Unless he's willing to say that yes, 40 hours was intended design. I also don't doubt that Wilson put in those thousands of hours and timed things with the stopwatch. I will, however, point out a flaw I see with that methodology. Timing how long it takes to get drops with a stopwatch, if you're looking around how to balance drop rates, this assumes a certain pace of play. If one person is playing at a very relaxed pace and another is playing at 20 times the pace, getting through content 20 times faster, then measuring the drop rates with a stopwatch is not really what you want to be doing unless your drop system is time-based, and in Diablo 2 it definitely was not time-based, so you want to be measuring in terms of content completed per drop, not time per drop. So let's say, completing Act 1, how many drops do I get? Completing Act 2, completing the entire game. But again, I digress. Now, Wilson also spoke about Diablo 2, or specifically, some things that changed between Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. He mentioned the difficulty in taking over an existing project for a beloved franchise.
And with Diablo, it's we did have people who worked on the previous Diablo games on the team, but not a lot of the core people. So we're interpreting. We're also, it's Blizzard HQ, and there's different values there than there were at Blizzard North, and different interpretations of things.
As a quick reminder, Blizzard North made Diablo 1 and 2, then started on Diablo 3 before the company heads clashed with Vivendi, Blizzard's parent company at the time, and then a large part of Blizzard North quit en masse. A couple years later, Blizzard shut down Blizzard North, kept some of the staff, and then they took over development of Diablo 3. So Wilson was put in a position where he had to make Diablo 3 without the team that made Diablo 2. It just could never be the same. That doesn't mean it has to be worse, but it just would be different. His new team, which he said consisted of about 70 to 90 people throughout most of D3's development, had to interpret the art of other artists. And Wilson spoke to the difficulty in that.
And we had a lot of pressure coming from kind of every direction of what Diablo should be. And I would say we had a lot of fights within the team that we had people on the team who were like, well, there's no magic in Diablo. There's no magic in Diablo?
Yeah.
There were people who were like, well, all the enemies are demons.
Here's an example of how part of interpreting the vision of Diablo 2 manifested into a choice for Diablo 3.
I do think one of the things that D3 inherits from Diablo 2 in spirit is I do think Diablo 2 in spirit wants to empower the player. It wants the player to feel like they're powerful. And so I really feel like we were taking that idea and extrapolating and saying like, well, yes, but it's now, this is the next game. How do we make the player feel more powerful? How do we make them feel better? And part of it is just smoother controls and more visceral feeling, like just more over the top kind of crazy stuff that we could come up with that would feel like the players are gods on the battlefield, which is really kind of what we wanted.
Part of improving the fluidity of combat came down to the controls. Wilson saw a lot of places with redundancy in controls in Diablo 2 and wanted to improve things. For instance, the way Diablo 2's skill system works, in combat you have to press one key to select a skill, then press another key to activate it. Wilson wanted to simplify that down to one key press to just activate the skill, which is what we got in Diablo 3.
We were like, can we make it simpler? Like, so it's easier to access so that it feels better, because you can have complicated controls. That doesn't make them good controls. There's nothing wrong with complex controls, but they have to feel natural and good.
Similarly with potions, he saw some redundancy there as well.
And then we also looked at things like the potion belt, and we're like, well, here's 4 buttons. Most of the time, 3 of them are doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. Like, why do you have 3 buttons that do the same thing? Like that, if you just looked at things like that, just went, this seems inefficient, and that we can keep decision complexity high, but reduce control complexity, because the control complexity wasn't actually creating additional decisions. Or at least that's not true. It was creating additional decisions, but it was not doing it at the scale of the complexity. So it was, if it's, this many buttons with this many button presses, how many actual decisions is the player making? If they're making a decision and then pressing 2 buttons, well, why do they have to press 2 buttons to make a decision? Like that doesn't seem necessary.
Basically, he's saying most people only had 2 types of potions in their belt slot, so why are there 4 different buttons to push? So in Diablo 3, this was simplified down to simply having 1 potion button, and you only have healing potions. They removed the mana potion and replaced that with different game systems to generate mana. The addition of cooldowns on potions is another matter entirely separate from the simplifying of the control scheme. Cooldowns is a whole other beast to discuss, which we're not going to cover in this video. Regardless, all this stemmed from a desire to have players make decisions while playing the game, like when to use a resource generating attack and when to use a resource spending attack, while also cutting out decisions that are not meaningful to make.
We want the player to make decisions while they're playing the game. And in Diablo 2, we felt like one of the flaws was there actually weren't a lot of decisions to make.
Overall, Wilson seems to prefer elegant simplicity over unnecessary complexity.
But I tend to prefer having a simpler system that shoots for depth. And you can get depth through complexity, but I feel like that's kind of the easiest way to get it. I feel like the games that really get people like at their core, they capture depth while maintaining approachability. And one way honestly, one of the easiest ways to maintain approachability is just keep your controls simple.
This extends to Wilson's belief that it's unnecessary to give players a lot of options. I feel quite differently about this, but I'll show you Wilson's take first.
And some people are like, options are great. I hate options. And I don't begrudge those people who love them. I understand why they do, but I look at it as, if I need a search system to find the thing that I want within your options, because your options are so complicated, you've actually made the choice for me, because I'm probably not going to find your option, and I'm just going to go with whatever your default was. Maybe you should have just chosen that default to begin with. Because the really important options, I'm not going to find, because they're buried in the 800 options you also put in there. But to make that happen, you actually have to, from the very beginning, you have to be incredibly mean about making options and just say, no, we're not making options, because that's what I said throughout Diablo 3, and there's still a ton of options in Diablo 3, like more than I wanted. But that's because I thought that we have that few, that we still have that many, but we have that few because I fought the whole way to try and remove like as many options as I could.
So personally, I love having options as a player, and I believe you can offer options to players who seek that experience while leaving things on the default choice that you feel is best for players. So for those who get overwhelmed by the amount of options, well, they'll just leave it on default, and that's the experience that you want everyone to default to. You can also do things like have basic and advanced options. Basically, the only downside that I could see in giving players too many options is that the development time is better spent elsewhere. But that's just me. Overall, this was an enlightening podcast. It was great to see Wilson come out and talk about Diablo again, and I'll remind you folks to check out the full podcast if you want to see more. because that's going to wrap up this video. But do be sure to check out my video on how Diablo almost didn't exist. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. As a reminder, we're doing our annual Patreon banner. To get your name on the poster right behind me, which you'll be able to buy in the shop, you just got to be a Patreon supporter by December 1st, even at the $1 tier, and that'll get your name on the poster. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more Diablo content.